Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. Amma ba'du, fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ma yalfidhu min qawlin illa ladayhi raqibun atid. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin mubarak wa sallim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. The verse I've recited before you is very profound. In it, Allah Azza wa Jal states that the human being does not utter a word except that illa ladayhi raqibun atid. There is a ready watcher, a guard. He records everything that you write down. The impact of this verse, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullahi alayhi was in his final moments, Imamul Muslimin, Imam Ahli Sunnah, and he was going through the pangs of death, and there was being emitted from his mouth the groans of that pain, and these verses entered his ears. Somebody recited them, and he suppressed the groans, and rahimahullah, he passed away silently. These people were so particular about what they say. Now, the reality is that anyone would be offended if you told them that what they say is meaningless, or if you ignored what they said or misconstrued it. People are taken seriously when they say something. Anybody who's sane and sober, anybody who's mature and sensible will not utter nonsense. When they speak, there'll be some meaning behind what they say. There'll be some intention. If somebody asks you to do one task, you are not expected to do another. If you order something, you are in a shop and you ask for something to be given to you from behind the till. It's what you ask for that is given to you, not something else. In formal situations, this becomes even more important. So I've just given the example of buying and selling. That is a contractual situation. You go into a shop, you go to a trader, and you ask for a particular product, and it's given to you. Sometimes this is done in writing. Sometimes this is done digitally. What you ask for is what you've given, is what you are given. If you make a mistake in the digits, and you wanted 5 of something and you ordered 50 and you got 50 through the post, when you check the details, you complain to the supplier, they say, you asked for 50. You look at your order, you realize you'd pressed the wrong digits. In a contractual situation, in a court of law, you are giving evidence or you are being cross-examined. You are giving a statement to a police officer and he's writing it down. You are aware of the consequences. You have your rights to guard your tongue, but what you say has an effect. How many times have people regretted what they've said? They've said one thing and they realize the consequences of that. And so we need to understand that this tongue of ours and this responsibility, this answerability, this autonomy in your own discretion that Allah has given you, it is connected to what you utter, what you speak. And in our deen as well, there are consequences. It is with this tongue that a person says the shahada, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. La ilaha illallah muhammadur rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So these adhkar have profound consequences in a person's dunya and akhirah. It is with this tongue that you say the takbir tahrima, Allahu Akbar, and now it's not permissible for you anymore to speak to somebody. It's haram now. That's why it's called takbir tahrima. And if you start speaking, the salah breaks. There is an implication. If you mispronounce certain parts of the Quran, certain mispronunciations may lead to the salah breaking and being nullified. In fact, even groaning in salah. This is why we sometimes have to remind our brethren, when you are very emotional because you are attending the janazah and funeral of a near or dear one, and you can't suppress the cry, that particular sound of crying will nullify, it will invalidate your janazah prayer. If a person is drawn to crying because of the fear of Allah, because of the verses of the Quran being recited, this does not nullify the prayer. Sayyidina Umar's crying could be heard in the back safs of the masjid, the back rows. But if a person is crying because of some physical pain or some emotional grief that has afflicted the person, it will nullify the prayer. So that even these sounds have an impact. When a child is born, a child which is stillborn, how do you differentiate? In fiqh, the fuqaha say that a child his sound isn't heard, his cry isn't heard, because this is a normal way. This is the normal way. So this is if the cry isn't heard and there's no sign of life, it's normally defined by the cry of the child. Of course, if you find yourself in this circumstance, consult ulama. There are other details, and we're not mentioning we're just focusing on the point of the cry that is mentioned by the fuqaha. If there's a clear sign of life, such as a heartbeat, such as breathing, etc., then this needs to be looked into in specific circumstances. But the generic point is when a child doesn't cry after being born, this is a cause of concern. The cry that you hear of a newborn child is a positive thing. So it has consequences on the child. Is this child going to now? Are we going to start preparing for janazah? Well, which way does this go? It has consequences. Is the child named? Is the child bathed? Does the child get a kafan? So right through our lives, this has a consequence. Man kana akhiru kalami la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. If your final words are la ilaha illallah, the hadith says a person who dies with these words enters into Jannah, if they are his final words. Similarly, in your hajj, if when you say the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, what happens? As soon as you make the intention, Allahumma inni aradtul hajja, Allahumma inni uridul hajja, fayassirhu li, wa taqabbalhu minni, may Allah make it possible for us to do hajj and umrah soon and in bigger numbers than before. When you make this intention, the implication immediately changes. You can put your ihram on before this, but you don't have to have it on. Now you have to have it on. You have to have had it on from the moment that you say the talbiyah, you make the niyyah. And from now, all the things which are prohibited in ihram, such as perfume, such as intimacy with one's spouse, such as cutting hair, such as wearing sewn clothes, etc., all these rules start applying. So what you say has an implication. Yeah, it makes a difference. What you say, what you utter. And I'm mentioning this because, unfortunately, people forget. People forget in particular circumstances, and I'm going to give you one very important one. I think the huge number of events which we constantly come in contact with merit a regular reminder on this particular one. What's happening is people forget. People forget that when you are engaged to someone, let's start from there. How does the engagement happen? It's verbal. It's verbal. There's no documentation. This is normally a verbal agreement. And so it's just that exchange of intent to marry, an agreement. Khitbah, as it's known in Arabic. Mangni, engagement. It's a verbal agreement in our deen. Then the nikah itself, it's a single word. Qabiltuha wa tazawwajtuha. She accepts and he accepts the offer. She is happy to be his bride, his wife, and he's accepting her as his wife. I've accepted her as my wife. He says this, and the nikah is done. It's a word, a kalima, a jumla, a sentence, a phrase. That's all it takes. So why is it then that we suddenly forget? Well, people think that, see, if you have a friend and you have a disagreement with a friend and you have an argument, and for a moment you're both at loggerheads, you're shouting at each other and you're saying things to one another, and then a while later you make up again, you shake each other's hand when you can, and you make up with each other, then you can put that behind you. But that's because you don't have a contract. Your friends, a marriage is a different situation. It's a contract. The contract is built with words and it's broken with words as well. It's a bit like knocking a glass over and the water is spilt. If it's done by mistake, it's spilt. If it's done on purpose, it's spilt. So if a person happens to drive into another car accidentally, let's suppose the car skids, there's black ice, it will not, the fact that there was no intention will not protect the other car. It will happen. These situations are like that too. If you say it, it happens. It's out of the bag. What are you going to do about it now? And this is what people forget. They don't understand. And so the most frequent point that we come across when people have a tiff in a family situation and he says talaq to her, what happens? As soon as he's being reminded, you've said it now, and unfortunately people don't bother to find out the proper way. There is something known as talaq bid'ah. Talaqul bid'ah. It's called bid'ah. Bid'ah is an innovation. It's a sin. It's contrary to the teaching of the Sharia and Sunnah. Talaqul bid'ah is when a person divorces his wife during her menstrual cycle. In Islam, it's not permissible. Nor is it permissible to give more than one at a time. And so, if a person does eventually, and this should be the last resort, decide to divorce his wife and give her talaq, it should be during her tuhr. And it should be one at a time. Nevertheless, if he issues more than one at a time, they will take effect. Now, the point here is that not only has he done the damage, he's also become sinful as a consequence. He's become sinful as a consequence. So it merits tawbah as well now. But the problem is, what do people say? They say, oh, I didn't intend it. So they suddenly realize that they can't get back together when he's given her 3. Some men will say, oh, I just said it as a threat to my wife. Subhanallah, you're using the Sharia of Allah as a threat. You're making a mockery of the institution of nikah. Who gave you that authority? Is that what it's for? You're using it as a stick to emotionally beat your wife with? What kind of Islam is that? That's not what our Sharia teaches us. And so, when you say something as a threat, the fact that your intention is to threaten her, but you've said to her, talaq, I give you talaq, I'm giving you talaq, our marriage is over, these types of situations, our marriage is over. If you say that in an argument with your wife, it will take effect. You need to consult if you've made such mistakes. So, in certain contexts, certain indirect words, talaqul qinaya, will have an effect as well. So the point here is, then he comes back and says, oh, but I didn't mean that. It wasn't my intention. I said talaq to her, but I didn't mean talaq. Well, we take you seriously because you're an intelligent human being. He said, I said it in anger. Okay, so had you punched someone in anger and broken their nose, would the nose not break because you were angry? Does your fist know that you said it because you're angry? Does the nose know it's not to break? Does the talaq know that it's not to be issued because you're uttering it in anger? People need to understand that here, what you say will count. Just as when you had the nikah done as well. You accepted her, it was counted. Nobody challenged your intention then. No one challenged your intention then. And this particular point, I said it in anger. Well, people are angry generally when they divorce their wives. So why is that an excuse? Is that a justification or something? And I'm mentioning these points because unfortunately these things are becoming, it doesn't get any better, unfortunately. And the problem that we have, and I'll just say it as it is, the problem that we have is when we perform a nikah, this is an occasion of celebration and happiness. And people are looking to have their nikah done and then move on, all smiles. And that's what we want for them as well. So it's not the occasion to start talking to people about divorce. It's not the occasion. People wouldn't receive it very well if they did. Some ulama have tried and people don't receive it very well. They don't want to hear about divorce on the day of their nikah. But what happens is people don't bother educating themselves. The etiquettes, the do's and don'ts. People assume that you're just going to move on in life, and in our deen there is specific detail in terms of how a couple should live together, what is permitted for them, what's not permitted for them, each rights and obligations and so forth, and the resolution, the way of avoiding disagreements and the way of resolving them, and all the various stages of those resolutions which eventually lead to mediation, which is in the Quran. And there's a promise there too. If it's done if both parties are sincere, then yuwaffiqillahu baynahuma. And then ultimately, if it's not being successful and the last result is a divorce, then so be it, with due consideration and in the proper way. And interestingly, another area which we discuss here is وَمَتِّعُهُنَّ, to give your wife a gift of clothing on the point of parting with her with a divorce, is what the Quran is saying, not curses from both sides. So there's so much to talk about here, so much to learn, But I think we need to come back to my initial point, recognize that as human beings, we are responsible for what we utter, and it has consequences. And those consequences in this dunya, we see examples daily of people having to resign from their jobs, lose their positions because of something they said, for example, having to defend themselves. Well, when it comes to this issue, understand that in Islam, nikah is built on the words of your tongue, and it's broken on the words of your tongue as well. And so we need to be responsible for that. May Allah Ta'ala grant us tawfiq to understand. نحمد و نصلی علی رسولہ الکریم اما بعد. انسان زندگی کے جس شعبے میں بھی قدم رکھے اس کے احکام جاننا اس پر لازم ہو جاتا ہے. جب انسان بالغ ہو تو بلوغ کے احکام جاننا لازم ہے. جب رمضان آئے اور روزے رکھنے ہیں تو روزے کیسے رکھے جاتے ہیں اور کن چیزوں سے روزے ٹوٹتے ہیں، یہ جاننا ہر مسلمان کے لیے ضروری ہے. اسی طرح صاحب نصاب بنے تو زکوٰۃ کے مسائل جاننا ضروری ہے. عید آئی تو فطرانہ قربانی کی عید آئی تو قربانی دینے کے احکام جاننا ضروری ہے. حج کے لیے مسافر بنے، اللہ تعالی حرمین کو پھر پہلے سے زیادہ آباد فرمائے اور حرمین شریفین کی حفاظت فرمائے، مساجد کی حفاظت فرمائے، مراکز کی حفاظت فرمائے. تو حج کو نکلے تو اب حج کے احکام جاننا ضروری ہے. لوگ حج کے لیے تربیہ پروگرام میں شرکت کرتے ہیں، ہر علاقے میں، ہر جگہ میں، مساجد میں حلقے ہوتے ہیں، تو یہ ضروری ہو جاتا ہے. رمضان کے مہینے میں بہت سارے لوگ زکوٰۃ نکالتے ہیں، تو زکوٰۃ کے لیے باقاعدہ مجلسیں منعقد کی جاتی ہیں تاکہ لوگ زکوٰۃ کے احکام جانیں اور سیکھیں. تو اسی طرح تجارت کرنی شروع کی، تاجر بنے، تجارتی معاملات میں مصروف ہوئے تو تجارت سے متعلق احکام جاننا ضروری ہے کہ اس طرح کی تجارت جائز ہے، اس طرح کی ناجائز ہے. لین دین، قرض کا لین دین، اس میں کیا جائز ہے، کیا ناجائز ہے، کیا سود ہوگا، کون سا طریقہ صحیح ہے اور درست ہے. الغرض زندگی کے جس شعبے میں بھی قدم رکھیں گے اس سے متعلق احکام کا جاننا ضروری ہوگا. انسان بغیر علم کے وضو بھی نہیں کر سکتا اور بغیر علم کے استنجا بھی نہیں کر سکتا اور بغیر علم کے 2 گانا 2 رکعت نماز بھی ادا نہیں کر سکتا، اذان بھی نہیں دے سکتا. اس کا جاننا ضروری ہے، اس کے مسائل جاننا ضروری ہے. ایسا نہیں کہ بس کھڑے ہو گئے اور شروع کر دیا، بلکہ اس کا اہتمام ضروری ہے. اور وہ اتنا علم واجب ہے جس سے انسان اپنے دین اور دینی اور یعنی اللہ تعالیٰ کے اور بندوں کے حقوق ادا کر سکے. تو ان میں نکاح بھی شامل ہے اور ان میں طلاق بھی شامل ہے. تو جب انسان نکاح کا ارادہ کرے تو اس کو چاہیے کہ نکاح میں کیا شوہر پر ذمہ داریاں عائد ہوتی ہیں، اس کے کیا واجبات ہیں، اور بیوی پر کیا ذمہ داریاں ہیں، اور دونوں کے لیے کن چیزوں کی اجازت ہے اور کون سی چیزیں ممنوع ہیں. تو یہ جاننا ضروری ہے تاکہ دونوں ایک دوسرے کے حقوق ادا کریں اور اس سلسلے میں اللہ تعالیٰ کو ناراض نہ کریں. اور پھر اگر انبن ہو جائے تو اس کے حل کرنے کے شرعی طریقے ڈھونڈنے چاہیے جو مفصل موجود ہیں قرآن اور حدیث میں. ازدواجی زندگی خوشگوار کیسے بن سکتی ہے، برکتوں والی کیسے ہو سکتی ہے، تو اس کے لیے تعلیمات ہیں. اور پھر اگر نہیں آپس میں بن رہی اور آپس میں صلح نہیں ہو رہی اور آپس کے معاملے بہتر نہیں ہو رہے اور بالآخر طلاق ہی پر نتیجہ پہنچ رہا ہے، تو طلاق دینے کا بھی ایک جائز طریقہ ہے، ایک ناجائز طریقہ ہے. اور یاد رکھنا چاہیے کہ ناجائز طریقے سے دیں گے پھر بھی طلاق ہو جائے گی لیکن گناہ بھی ہوگا، اور پھر بہت سارے لوگ پچھتاتے بھی ہیں، معلوم کرنے کی تکلیف زحمت نہیں کرتے اور پھر دے دیتے ہیں، پھر روتے ہیں. تو پہلے سے معلوم کرنا چاہیے، اس کے مسائل سیکھنے چاہیے. غصے میں دے دی تو بھائی غصے میں تو ہو جائے گی، جس طرح غصے میں کسی کو مکہ مار دیا، غصہ مار دیا تو اس کو تو تکلیف ہوگی، غلطی سے بھی کریں گے تو ہو جائے گا. تو اس طرح تو جو الفاظ جس طرح زبان سے ہی نکاح منعقد ہوا تھا، جب کوئی کلمہ پڑھتا ہے تو ہم اس کی نیت کو نہیں جان سکتے، نہ ہمیں اس کا حکم ہے، بلکہ اس کو مسلمان سمجھا جائے گا. تو کسی کے کلمے پڑھنے پر اس کو مسلمان سمجھا جائے گا، کسی کے نکاح کی مجلس میں ایجاب اور قبول کے وقت قبول کرنے پر اس کو شوہر سمجھا جائے گا. اسی طرح طلاق کے الفاظ اگر وہ کہے تو اس کو وہ یہ سوچتا ہے کہ اتنے سال میں نے اس کے ساتھ گزارے، ہمارے آپس میں بچے بھی ہیں، تو بس اتنے سے ہمارا رشتہ ختم ہو گیا. جی بھائی، تمہیں ذمہ دار بنایا تھا اللہ تعالیٰ نے اور تمہیں اپنی زبان پر کنٹرول رکھنا چاہیے تھا. تو اب تم نقصان اپنا کر گئے تو پہلے معلوم کرنا چاہیے تھا، سوچ کر بولنا چاہیے تھا. انسان کو بہت سوچ سمجھ کر، اسی لیے ایک سے زیادہ ایک توہر میں طلاق دینے کی اجازت بھی نہیں ہے. اس میں یہ حکمت بھی تو ہے کہ انسان بعد میں رجوع بھی تو کر سکے. پہلے سے ہی ساری آپشنز اپنے دروازے سارے بند کر دو گے تو اپنا نقصان کرو گے. اللہ تعالیٰ سمجھنے کی توفیق عطا فرمائے اور گھروں میں اللہ تعالیٰ زوجین کو آپس میں شیر و شکر کر دے, ہر گھرانے میں اللہ تعالیٰ برکتیں عطا فرمائے اور شریعت کے احکام کے مطابق ہمیں ہر چیز میں خوشی میں غمی میں چلنے کی توفیق عطا فرمائے. وآخر دعوانا الحمد للہ رب العالمین. صلی اللہ وسلم علی عبدہ ورسولہ سیدنا محمد وآلہ وصحبہ.